Which one of my twin daughters is actually mine? The realization hit me during bath time on a Thursday evening when both girls were splashing in the tub and I called out, "Lily, stop getting water on the floor," but neither of them responded. I tried again, louder this time, and both girls turned to look at me with identical blue eyes and identical confused expressions. My stomach twisted because I'd been so certain the one on the left was Lily, the one who always splashed too much, but now I couldn't remember why I thought that. They were 7 years old, and I'd been their mother their entire lives. Yet standing there with a towel in my hands, I realized I had no idea which twin was which. The thought was so absurd I almost laughed, but then I noticed the small birthmark I'd always used to tell them apart was on the right shoulder of both girls. That couldn't be right. I'd specifically remembered Lily had the mark and Nora didn't, but looking at them now, identical marks sat in identical places on identical shoulders. My hands started shaking as I wrapped them in towels and rushed them to bed without our usual storytime routine. That night, I went through every photo album we had, looking for evidence of which girl was which. In the hospital pictures from when they were born, both babies wore identical pink hats with no names written on them. The nurse had assured me they'd put different colored bracelets on them, but in the photos, both bracelets looked the same shade of pink. I found our first family photo where I was holding both babies, one in each arm, but the photographer hadn't labeled which side was which. Every early photo showed two identical infants in identical clothes doing identical things. I'd always dressed them the same because I thought it was cute, but now that choice felt like a catastrophic mistake. My husband Keith had left for a business trip that morning and wouldn't be back for 3 days, so I was alone with this growing panic that I'd somehow mixed up my own daughters. The rational part of my brain said this was impossible, that mothers know their children, that 7 years of daily contact would make them distinguishable. But the terrified part of my brain kept asking, which one did I give birth to first? Which one weighed more at birth? Which one had colic? I couldn't remember any of it clearly. The next morning at breakfast, I tried a different approach and asked each girl directly what her name was. The one sitting on the left said, Lily, without hesitation, while the one on the right said, Nora, with the same confidence. But something about their responses felt rehearsed, like they'd been expecting the question. I asked follow-up questions about their favorite colors and foods, writing down their answers to compare with what I remembered. Lily said purple and macaroni, which matched my memory perfectly. Nora said green and pizza, also matching perfectly. Everything they told me aligned with years of knowing them, but doubt had planted itself in my mind and was growing roots. What if they'd been switched as babies and I'd just been calling them by the wrong names all this time? What if the personalities I associated with each name were actually attached to the wrong child? I served them cereal with trembling hands while they chattered about their upcoming school field trip, completely unaware that their mother was having an existential crisis about their basic identities. After dropping them at school, I drove straight to Dr. Patricia Chen's office without an appointment and begged the receptionist to squeeze me in. Dr. Chen had been our pediatrician since the girls were born and had seen them at every checkup and sick visit for 7 years. If anyone could tell me which twin was which, it would be her. The receptionist said she only had a 15-minute slot between appointments, but I took it and spent the next hour in the waiting room Googling how to tell identical twins apart on my phone. Every article said the same things. Look for birthmarks, note personality differences, observe behavioral patterns. But what if the birthmarks had been misidentified from the start? What if my observations of their personalities were colored by calling them the wrong names for years? Dr. Chen finally called me back, and I must have looked insane because she closed the door and asked if I was having some kind of emergency. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, about the birthmarks appearing on both shoulders and not being able to remember which girl was born first. Her face shifted from concern to something else, maybe pity or confusion, and she pulled up their medical files on her computer. According to her records, Lily had been born at 3:47 a.m. and Nora at 3:52 a.m., both weighing exactly 6 pounds 3 ounces. Dr. Chen pointed at her notes from their first checkup where she'd written that baby A, Lily, had a small birthmark on her right shoulder. But when I asked to see photos from that appointment, she explained they didn't typically photograph birthmarks unless they were concerning. I asked about blood type differences or any other distinguishing medical features, but she said they were genetically identical in every measurable way. She suggested I was probably just tired or stressed, and that this kind of confusion was normal for parents of identical twins. I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt off, like she was reading from a script of reassuring things doctors say to anxious mothers. As I left her office, I glanced back and saw her making a note in my file, probably something about postpartum anxiety even though my girls were 7 years old. The drive home felt surreal, like I was floating through someone else's life where mothers didn't know their own children. I picked the girls up from school that afternoon and studied them carefully as they climbed into the car. The one I called Lily got in first and buckled herself in the left seat like she always did. The one I called Nora took the right seat and immediately started telling me about her art class project. These patterns felt solid and real, ingrained through years of repetition. But then I remembered reading that identical twins often develop opposite but equal behaviors as a way of establishing individuality. What if they'd been sitting in the wrong seats from the start, and I'd just gotten used to it? At home, I made them each write their names on paper and watched how they formed the letters. Their handwriting was nearly identical, both using the same right-handed grip and forming the letters with similar loops. I asked them to show me their favorite toys, and they each went to different corners of their shared bedroom, retrieving specific stuffed animals they'd had for years. Everything they did matched my memories of them, but the doubt kept growing. That night, after tucking them in, I sat in their doorway watching them sleep, trying to see any difference that would prove I knew which was which. Keith called from his hotel around 10 p.m., and I tried to explain what was happening without sounding completely insane. He listened patiently before saying I was probably just overwhelmed from handling both girls alone while he traveled. He suggested I get more sleep, and everything would seem clearer in the morning. His dismissive tone made me angry because this wasn't about being tired or stressed. This was about the fundamental reality of our family being potentially wrong. I asked him if he remembered which girl was born first, and he said Lily, obviously, but couldn't remember any specific details about their births. When I pressed him about the birthmarks, he admitted he'd never really looked that closely and had always just trusted my labels. We'd been a team raising these children, but now I realized I'd been the primary namer and identifier while he'd just gone along with whatever I said. The conversation ended badly with him telling me to take a sleeping pill and me hanging up without saying goodbye. I stayed awake until 3 a.m. looking through digital photos on my laptop, zooming in on tiny details trying to find proof of which girl was which. The next morning was Saturday, so the girls had swimming lessons at the community pool. I'd signed them up using their names months ago, and the instructor, a college student named Bailey, had been teaching them all summer. As we walked to the pool, I decided to test something and told the girls to go get changed while I talked to Bailey. I asked her which twin was the stronger swimmer, and she pointed to the girl on the left saying, "That one's definitely ahead. She's not afraid of the deep end." I asked if she knew the girl's name, and Bailey looked confused before saying, "You're their mom, you tell me." The answer sent chills down my spine because it meant even their swim instructor couldn't independently identify them. During the lesson, I watched both girls dive and swim with nearly identical strokes, both comfortable in deep water. Everything Bailey had said about one being more advanced seemed wrong because they performed exactly the same. After class, I asked the girls who did better, and they both said they'd done the same, which matched what I'd observed. Bailey had been projecting differences that didn't exist, maybe because she'd been told one twin was named Lily, and unconsciously looked for ways to distinguish them. That afternoon, I called my mother and asked if she could tell the twins apart when she visited. There was a long pause before she admitted she usually waited for me to use their names first, and then followed my lead. I asked if she'd noticed the birthmarks, and she said she thought only one twin had a mark but couldn't remember which shoulder or which girl. My father got on the phone and said he'd always told them apart by their personalities, with Lily being more outgoing and Nora being quieter. But when I asked for specific examples, he couldn't provide any recent ones, just generalizations that could apply to either girl depending on the day. My parents were coming to visit next weekend for the girls' birthday party, and I realized I couldn't even be certain we'd been celebrating the right birthday for the right child. The thought was so disturbing, I had to sit down on the kitchen floor and focus on breathing slowly until the panic passed. Keith wouldn't be home until late Sunday, and I was trapped in this nightmare alone with two children I could no longer confidently name. Sunday morning, the girls wanted to make pancakes, so I let them measure ingredients while I supervised. I asked casual questions about their earliest memories, trying to see if their answers matched stories I'd told them about their childhoods. The one I called Lily remembered falling off the swing set at age 4 and getting stitches, which matched my memory of Lily's accident. The one I called Nora remembered losing her favorite doll at the grocery store around the same age, which matched my memory of Nora's tantrum. Their memories aligned perfectly with the narrative I'd built around their identities, but that didn't prove anything. Children's early memories are often constructed from family stories and photos rather than actual recall. I'd been telling them stories about when Lily did this and when Nora did that their entire lives. What if I'd been assigning the wrong stories to the wrong child and they'd just internalized my mistakes? As they poured batter onto the griddle, I noticed they both tilted the pan the exact same way. Every gesture and movement was synchronized in a way that made individual identification impossible. That afternoon, I took them to the park and watched how other mothers interacted with their children. Every mom seemed to know instinctively which kid was which, calling out names without hesitation and responding to individual needs without confusion. I felt like an imposter pretending to be a competent parent while secretly having no idea who my children were. At the playground, both girls gravitated toward the monkey bars and climbed with identical technique. A mother sitting near me commented on how cute it was that they did everything together, and I forced a smile while internally screaming. When it was time to leave, I called out, "Girls, let's go," instead of using their individual names, and they both came running. The walk home felt like moving through thick fog where nothing was solid or certain anymore. Keith would be home in a few hours, and I needed to decide whether to tell him how deep this rabbit hole went or pretend everything was fine. Keith arrived around 6 p.m. with takeout Chinese food, and immediately sensed something was wrong. Over dinner, I laid out everything that had been building over the past 3 days. The dual birthmarks, the medical records that didn't prove anything, the inability of other people to independently identify the girls, my growing certainty that something was fundamentally wrong. He listened without interrupting until I finished, then said very calmly that I needed to see someone because this wasn't normal anxiety. His reaction made me furious because he was treating this like my mental health problem instead of a legitimate mystery about our children's identities. I asked him to test himself and tell me which girl was sitting on the left side of the table without looking at her face. He glanced over, hesitated for a full 5 seconds, then guessed, "Lily?" But his voice went up at the end like a question. I asked why he thought that, and he admitted he was just guessing based on her seat position, not any actual identifying feature. The admission hung in the air between us until the girl spoke up and said, "Dad, I'm Nora," and my heart stopped completely. After the girls went to bed that night, Keith and I stayed up until 2 a.m. discussing every possibility. Could they have been switched at the hospital? The hospital had protocols specifically to prevent that, but mistakes happened. Could we have confused them ourselves as babies? Identical twins were notoriously hard to tell apart in the first few months. Could the girls be playing some elaborate prank? 7-year-olds were capable of sustained deception, but this felt too complex. Keith pulled up our hospital bill from their birth and found the itemized charges, which included twin identification bracelets as a line item. That should have prevented any mixing, but without photos of those specific bracelets, we couldn't verify which color went to which baby. I suggested we could do DNA testing to see if there were any microscopic differences, but Keith pointed out that identical twins share the same DNA by definition. Nothing we thought of provided a clear path to certainty. We finally went to bed exhausted and scared, with Keith agreeing to take the girls for a full medical workup that week to document every detail about their bodies. Monday morning, I kept the girls home from school claiming they had mild colds. Instead, I set up my laptop and pulled out every photo from the hospital, arranging them chronologically. The first photo showed 2 babies in identical bassinets with pink bracelets, but the camera angle made it impossible to read the bracelet text clearly. The second photo showed me holding both babies, but I looked exhausted and drugged from the C-section, not like someone carefully tracking which baby was which. In the third photo, Keith was holding one baby while a nurse held the other, but again, no clear labels. I found the official hospital footprint cards that had been made after birth, 2 sets of tiny inked feet on pink paper. One card said, Baby A, Lily Catherine Morgan, and the other said, Baby B, Nora Elizabeth Morgan. But the footprints looked identical to my untrained eye. I photographed both cards and uploaded them to a forensic comparison website that claimed to identify individuals by footprint patterns. The site's algorithm ran for 10 minutes before returning a message saying the prints were too similar to generate a confident match. Another dead end in an investigation that kept hitting walls. Keith took the girls to their pediatrician for full physicals on Wednesday morning while I stayed home and called the hospital where they were born. I asked to speak to someone in medical records and explained I needed detailed documentation of my daughter's births. The records clerk said everything should have been provided at discharge, but she could request copies of the nursing notes for a fee. I paid immediately, and she said it would take 3 to 5 business days to process. While waiting for Keith to return, I searched online for other parents who'd experienced confusion with identical twins. I found dozens of forums where parents admitted to occasionally mixing up their twins for brief moments, but nothing like the sustained uncertainty I was experiencing. One mother mentioned using nail polish colors to keep her twins straight until they were old enough to reliably answer to their names. Another family had temporarily tattooed small symbols on their twins' ankles for identification. These were preventative measures, not solutions for parents who'd already lost track. The closest I found was a post from 3 years ago where a mother asked, "What if we've been calling them the wrong names?" But the thread had been locked by moderators for being unnecessarily anxious. Keith returned with detailed measurements and photos of both girls. He'd had Dr. Chen document their heights, weights, dental patterns, eye coloring variations, skin texture differences, and he'd photographed both birthmarks. Looking at the photos side by side, the birthmarks were in nearly identical positions, but the one on the left girl had a slightly more irregular edge, while the right girl's mark was more circular. This was the first distinguishing feature I'd seen in days, and I grabbed onto it desperately. According to Keith's notes from Dr. Chen, the more irregular birthmark belonged to Lily based on historical medical records. That meant the girl we'd been calling Lily still matched her medical file, which should have been reassuring, but Dr. Chen had also noted in the margin that birthmarks can change shape as children grow, and that she couldn't personally verify this matched what she'd documented as a newborn 7 years ago. The caveat destroyed any certainty I'd begun to feel. We had a piece of evidence that suggested we might be right, but no way to prove it definitively without time travel back to the delivery room. The hospital medical records arrived by email that Friday afternoon while the girls were at school. I opened the PDF with shaking hands and found 23 pages of nursing notes, vitals, and procedural documentation. On page 4, a nurse named Gloria Barrett had written, Baby A delivered 0347, APGAR 8/9, pink bracelet placed right ankle, handed to mother. Baby B delivered 0352, APGAR 8/9, purple bracelet placed right ankle, handed to father. My heart started racing because purple wasn't pink. which meant there had been a distinguishing feature I'd either forgotten or never properly noticed. I scrolled frantically through our hospital photos looking for ankle shots and found exactly one photo where both babies' feet were visible. The image was slightly blurry, but when I zoomed in, both bracelets looked the same shade of pink-purple. Either the lighting had made the purple look pink, or the nurse had written the wrong color, or the bracelets had been switched before the photo. I called the hospital records department and asked to speak to Gloria Barrett, but was told she'd retired 4 years ago, and they couldn't give out personal information. That evening, Keith and I sat the girls down and explained very carefully that we were going to do something unusual. We told them we were going to call them by different names for 1 week to see if anything felt wrong or right. The girl we'd been calling Lily would be called Nora, and vice versa. Both girls looked confused, and the one we'd been calling Lily said, "But I'm already Lily. Why would you call me something different?" Her response seemed genuine and unrehearsed, which made this experiment feel even more cruel. We explained it was just a game to see what happened and that they should correct us if the wrong name felt uncomfortable. For the next 7 days, we committed to swapping their names consistently and watching for any reaction that might reveal the truth. The first day was incredibly difficult, with Keith and I both stumbling over the unfamiliar name-face combinations. The girls corrected us constantly at first, insisting we had it wrong, but by day 3 they'd started responding to the swapped names more readily. By day 7, both girls answered to either name without hesitation and showed no preference when asked which felt more natural. The experiment had proven nothing except that 7-year-old brains are adaptable, and that names are arbitrary labels that can be learned or unlearned with repetition. At the end of the week, we switched back to the original names, and the girls settled into their familiar patterns without complaint. I'd hoped the experiment would reveal some deep instinctual knowledge they had about their true identities, but instead it showed that identity is more constructed than essential. That night, I had a breakdown in the bathroom while Keith held me and promised we'd figure this out. I told him I felt like I was losing my mind, that every time I looked at the girls, I saw question marks instead of my daughters. He suggested we take a family trip to see a specialist who worked with identical twins at a research hospital 3 hours away. I agreed immediately, desperate for any expert opinion that might provide clarity. The specialist, Dr. Raymond Green, had published papers on twin identity formation and apparently worked with families experiencing exactly this kind of crisis. Keith made an appointment for the following Wednesday, and I spent the next few days trying to act normal around the girls while internally spiraling. Dr. Green's office was in a research building attached to University Hospital and smelled like antiseptic and old books. He was maybe 60 years old with kind eyes and spoke to the girls before addressing Keith and me. He gave them puzzles to work on in an adjoining playroom while he interviewed us in his office. I explained the entire situation from the bath time realization through the name-swapping experiment, and he took detailed notes without judgment. When I finished, he asked permission to run the girls through a series of assessments that would look at their individual cognitive patterns, handedness, personality traits, and behavioral tendencies. He explained that even identical twins develop small neurological differences based on their positions in the womb and their individual experiences after birth. These differences might not be visible to parents, but could show up in standardized testing. The assessment would take about 4 hours and cost $1,200 that insurance wouldn't cover, but we agreed immediately. Anything that might provide answers was worth whatever it cost. The girls spent the afternoon playing games and answering questions with Dr. Green's research assistants while Keith and I waited in a cafeteria downstairs. I couldn't eat anything and just pushed coffee around a styrofoam cup while watching families come and go. Keith tried to make small talk about work but gave up when I couldn't focus on anything except what was happening upstairs. Around 4:30, a research assistant came down to get us, and we followed her back to Dr. Green's office, where the girls were eating animal crackers and comparing drawings. Dr. Green gestured for us to sit while the girls continued their snack in the playroom. He pulled up data on his computer and turned the screen so we could see twin comparison charts. According to his assessments, both girls showed right brain dominance, both had similar emotional regulation patterns, and both scored identically on spatial reasoning tasks. There were minor differences in their verbal fluency and memory recall, but Dr. Green said these were within normal variation for identical twins. Nothing in his testing provided a definitive way to distinguish one from the other beyond our own naming convention. Dr. Green explained that identical twin identification was actually a much more complex problem than most people realized. He said hospitals occasionally made mistakes with twin bracelets. Parents frequently confused their twins in the early months, and even twins themselves sometimes reported feeling uncertain about their individual identities. He pulled up a study from his own research showing that approximately 2 to 3% of identical twin parents he surveyed admitted to experiencing sustained uncertainty about which child was which, though most never spoke about it publicly due to shame. He said the fact that we'd come seeking help was actually healthy and showed we cared about getting it right. When I asked what we should do going forward, he said something that simultaneously relieved and horrified me. The truth is, it may not matter which name belongs to which girl. They've been responding to these names for 7 years and have built their identities around them. Switching now, even if we could somehow prove the names were wrong, might cause more harm than good. His words landed like a bomb in the quiet office. We'd spent weeks trying to solve a mystery only to be told the solution didn't matter. The drive home was silent, except for the girls chattering in the back seat about the fun games they'd played at the doctor's office. They had no idea their parents had just been told their fundamental identities might be built on a mistake that couldn't be fixed. Keith and I didn't speak about it until after we'd tucked the girls in and were sitting in the dark living room. He said maybe Dr. Green was right. That identity is more about the person you become than the name you're given at birth. I wanted to accept that, but part of me still ached with the need to know the truth. We agreed to keep calling the girls by their current names and to stop investigating further for their sake. The decision felt both mature and cowardly. That night, I dreamed about the delivery room, watching two identical babies being handed to me, while nurses called out Baby A and Baby B in overlapping voices that blended into meaningless sound. I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat and checked on both girls, watching them sleep in their twin beds on opposite sides of the room. Even in sleep, they looked perfectly identical, their breathing synchronized, their positions mirrored. Life slowly returned to normal over the next few weeks, though normal now had a layer of unreality I couldn't shake. I stopped checking for differences between the girls and just treated them as individuals based on their behaviors and preferences. The girl I called Lily continued to be more outgoing, and the one I called Nora remained slightly quieter, though I could never be certain if these traits were innate or performed in response to my expectations. Their 8th birthday party came in October, and we celebrated without acknowledging the possibility that we might be celebrating on the wrong day for the wrong child. Friends and family came over and nobody knew about the crisis we'd been through. My mother pulled me aside at one point and asked if I was feeling better, because I'd seemed stressed during her last visit. I told her I was fine and changed the subject before she could ask more questions. Keith gave me a look across the crowded room that said we were keeping this secret together, protecting our daughters from knowledge that might damage them. 3 months after the birthday party, I was putting away laundry in the girls' room when I found a notebook shoved under Nora's mattress. I knew I shouldn't read it, but pulled it out anyway and flipped to a random page. The entry was dated 2 weeks earlier and written in her careful second-grade handwriting. Mom keeps looking at us weird. She thinks we don't notice, but we do. Me and Lily talked about it, and we think maybe she got us mixed up when we were babies. We decided we don't care because we like our names and we like being who we are. If she asks us to switch, we're going to say no. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the notebook. The girls knew. They'd figured out what was happening and made their own decision about their identities. I carefully put the notebook back and left the room before they came home from school. That night at dinner, I watched both girls more carefully than usual, looking for any sign they wanted to tell me about their conversation. Neither of them brought it up, and we ate spaghetti and talked about their upcoming school play like everything was perfectly normal in our perfectly normal family. I never told Keith about the notebook because part of me worried he'd want to confront the girls about what they'd written. Instead, I decided to respect their choice, the same way Dr. Green had suggested we respect the identities they'd built. If they were comfortable being who they'd become, who was I to force a truth that might not even be accurate? The girls were happy, healthy, and developing normally. They had friends, interests, and distinct personalities that had evolved over 7 years of living as Lily and Nora. Whatever mistakes might have been made at the hospital or in those early confused months didn't change who they actually were now. This realization brought a strange kind of peace that settled over me gradually like snow covering rough ground. I stopped searching their bodies for distinguishing marks and stopped analyzing every behavioral difference for clues about their true identities. They were both mine in every way that mattered, regardless of which name had been assigned to which tiny body in that delivery room 7 years ago. The question of which twin was actually mine never got a definitive answer. The hospital records were inconclusive, the medical assessments were inconclusive, and even the girls themselves seemed to have accepted the ambiguity of their situation. Sometimes late at night, I still wonder if Baby A really did get the pink bracelet and Baby B got the purple one, or if some tired nurse mixed them up in those first chaotic minutes of life. I wonder if the birthmarks were always in the same place, or if I misremembered their original locations. I wonder if calling them by the wrong names for 7 years fundamentally changed who they would have been otherwise. But these questions matter less now than they did during those panicked weeks of investigation. My daughters are Lily and Nora because that's who they've been for as long as they can remember. Identity isn't just about biology or hospital bracelets or birth order. It's about the accumulation of experiences and memories and relationships that shape a person over time. Maybe the girls are exactly who they were always meant to be, regardless of what their names were supposed to be. Or maybe I'll never know for certain and have to live with that uncertainty for the rest of my life. Either way, they're both mine, and that's the only truth that really matters anymore. If you're still here, you're a true fan. Show some support with a like and subscribe to catch the next one.